Hey everybody, Josh Collacchi here with RotoCurve, and welcome back to just another great slate for daily fantasy baseball. We have a lot to talk about today, so I want to get into it as soon as we can. But before we do that, I want to discuss last night's pitching. I thought it was going to be a good night for pitchers, and I missed a little bit because there really weren't that many pitchers that had good performances. We talked about guys I like were Matt Harvey, Gio Gonzalez, and Andrew Heaney. Gonzalez and Heaney were okay. They were pretty good. They weren't great, but Harvey was just really not that good. He dominated after the first 3 innings, but the whole game counts. He allowed 5 earned runs, didn't have many strikeouts, so it wasn't a great night for pitching. But tonight, I'm really excited because there's a lot of young arms on the slate, and that's something that you've heard me talk about a lot with guys like when Vincent Velasquez came up, Lance McCullers. We have a lot of young arms tonight, even a Phillies young right-handed pitcher named Aaron Nola, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But I like guys like Joe Ross. We have guys like Chris Heston pitching against the Padres. We have different young cheap pitchers like Carlos Rodon against the Cardinals. There's plenty of options today, and I want to get right into it because there are a lot of guys I'm using, but it's a little bit different from what I've talked about in the past because I really like the really talented, high-priced pitchers. But some of these really talented pitchers aren't very highly priced today. So let's get into it while we're right on the topic. My top option today is just cash only for him because obviously what limits his upside, but it's Michael Wacha. We've talked about him before. He's a very consistent option. He faces the White Sox, whose offense is probably the worst in terms of scoring runs in baseball. Now, they do hit righties a little bit more than lefties, but they're really struggling this season. And besides Jose Abreu and Melky Cabrera, there's not too much to be reckoned with in that White Sox offense. So I do like Wacha. That being said, he's probably not going to be in many of my lineups today because of the way that this slate is designed. The fact is that he costs a lot more than the other pitchers I do like, and why he is my top option, and I would recommend him in cash games. I might be staying away from him because I do want to pay up for those big hitters in Coors Field today against Matt Harrison and Kyle Kendrick. So here are some cheap options that I want to get into. I have posted on the forums, on the RotoCurve forums, my pitching rankings for today. There's 11 pitchers that I do like, and they're ranked from 1 to 11. But some of the guys I wanted to talk about that are cheap on that list are Joe Ross against the Mets. You heard me just mention him. He's a very good young pitcher for the Nationals, and just what they need, right? Another good young pitcher. He's right-handed. He throws a fastball in the low 90s, as a slider and a curveball as well. But what's interesting about him is he throws 80% fastball so far in 3 starts. And if you watch him pitch, he throws straight downhill, which has really limited the opponent's ability to hit the ball hard. I think they only have a line drive percent of about 16.7%, and he's given up a lot, or he's got a ground ball rate of close to 70%. And throwing that many fastballs is very impressive. I do like him against the Mets because we talked about it yesterday. The Mets offense is very bad. It's one of the worst in baseball against lefties and righties, but it's even worse against righties, and that's what Ross is today. They have the lowest slugging percentage in baseball and the second lowest weighted on base average. So that gives Ross a very good matchup. And honestly, he's no slouch himself. So if you give him even a decent matchup or an average matchup, he's still a good play. But considering the Mets are one of the worst in baseball, it makes for a great matchup. He has 20 innings, 20 and a third innings, 23 strikeouts, and 6 earned runs so far this season. And you heard me just talk about the amount of fastballs that he throws. That's why he's only walked 2 batters as well. And that's huge on 2-pitcher sites like DraftKings and Fantasy Aces because those walks will hurt you. Not only are they guys that get on base, but you get negative points for them as well. Now, when I talk about young pitchers, I want to look at how they've faced against certain teams and if they're doing well in certain matchups. And Ross has faced the Pirates, the Brewers, and the Cubs so far this season. They all have similar numbers against right-handed pitching like the Mets, but all of them are significantly better in most categories. So the fact that he's facing the Mets and he's been successful in offense that's been better, it gives him another slight option or slight bump in his value for today. One more thing about Ross, he's extremely cheap. I believe in the 5,000s on DraftKings and just under 6,000 on FanDuel as well. So if you take him, you have enough room to fit all those top bats and even a high-priced pitcher if you choose to go that route today. The other young pitcher I want to talk about is Carlos Rodon against the Cardinals. You've heard me talk about left-handed pitchers against the Cardinals for a long time, and this is no exception. They're one of the only matchups in baseball, and what I mean by that is one offense against a left-handed pitcher or a right-handed pitcher. They're one of the only options that check all the boxes. They have a very low batting average, slugging percentage, isolated power, weighted on base average, and they strike out a lot. So anytime there's a left-handed pitcher that faces them, they're always on my radar. But a guy that's as talented as Rodon makes for an even better matchup. The only issue that he's had lately is he walks a lot of guys, and that comes a lot with young pitchers that trade stuff. But Rodon can throw in the mid-90s, even get up to the high 90s in terms of his velocity. But I do like his ability to strike guys out, and he's been pitching deeper into games of late as well. So if he can stay away from the walks, he has that excellent matchup against the Cardinals, and he makes for a very good play in cash and GPP games today. The only thing to worry about him on sites like DraftKings and Fantasy Aces, he allows a lot of base runners, so he might make for more of a FanDuel play when it just runs allowed and he's pitched and strikeouts. There are two more pitchers I wanted to talk about real quick, and the first one is Chris Heston against the Padres. We've talked about Heston before and how successful he is at home. He's not at home today, but he pitches in San Diego, and that's one thing to look at because those two parks are very similar, meaning Petco Park and AT&T. So even though Heston is on the road, he does have that ballpark factor in his advantage, and he's been pitching well in big ballparks like that. Not to mention he faces that Padres team who's been really bad so far of late. I think they're the worst offense in baseball over the last 2 months, and it's because some of them have had injuries. Some guys aren't hitting as well. Matt Kemp's been hitting well of late, but other than that, there really aren't that many options in that lineup that really scares anybody. The only thing with Heston today is he's priced pretty highly relative to his past prices and different starts, but I think that's going to keep his own percentage down, and it makes for a little bit of a contrarian play in most tournaments. So for me, Heston's a tournament option because of that high price, but not many people are going to be spending on pitchers today, with a lot of people on Joe Ross, guys like Chris Heston, and the next guy I'm going to talk about is Brett Anderson. Anderson is probably one of my favorite pitchers in baseball, not from a fantasy perspective, but just from a pure baseball and pitching perspective, simply because he gets an insane amount of ground balls. That's why I like him in cash games, especially on one-pitcher sites where you don't really have the detriment of allowing base runners, which he does do with a whip close to 1.3. But I do like him in cash games because he has allowed 3 earned runs or less in 9 of his last 10 starts. He has the ERA in the low 3s, and he faces the Braves, who are just like the Cardinals, one of the only matchups in a lefty or righty split to check all the boxes. We talked about with the fact that the Cardinals have a low batting average and things like that. The Braves are just like that, but they're even worse, and they're a National League team, so they have a pitcher batting as well. In the last 14 days, in the last 21 days, the Braves have been bad too. So the fact is their offense has been bad the whole year, the last 14 days, and they really don't hit left-handed pitching well. With a guy like Brett Anderson who gets left-handed batters and right-handed batters out with the fastball that he works down in the zone to get a ton of ground balls, it makes for a great option to potentially get a win, which is big on sites like FanDuel, but you really need that 4-point bonus. Of those 4 pitchers I talked about with Heston, Joe Ross, Carlos Rodon, and Brett Anderson, I'm going to have a combination of all of them in addition to Waka and 1 or 2 of my cap games as well. But between all of those, the guy I'm going to have the most is probably Joe Ross in cash game, simply because I think a lot of other people will have him as well, and I do think he's going to pitch well, so I don't want to miss that boat. But in tournaments, I'm going to have a mix of Chris Heston, Carlos Rodon, and probably a guy like I'll throw in a Jacob deGrom against the Nationals, although he doesn't have a fantastic matchup. He is one of the better pitchers on the site, and he will be very low owned because people will want to spend up on those Colorado bats. But in these cash games and a lot of my tournaments as well, I will be picking with a mixture of Ross, Chris Heston, Rodon, have a guy like Brett Anderson mixed in, and I'm going to need to save money, which is why I'm using these cheap pitchers, because you're going to need to spend on those Coors bats today, as Benny talked about, as Rath talked about, and everybody's going to be playing those guys because 2 of the worst pitchers in baseball, Matt Harrison and Kyle Kendrick, are pitching against each other in Coors Field. So that could make for a lot of fireworks up there in Colorado. Those are my thoughts on pitching for today. So be sure to monitor the lineups page on RotoCurve as lineups begin to come out. Be sure to always check out Danielle's weather post later in the day, because she really makes a difference between playing certain guys and not playing certain guys, because that weather can really affect these matchups, especially with pitching. Now, one more thing I wanted to add before we get out of here is we added 2 more tools on RotoCurve in the past 2 days. That is the bomb detector, which detects some of the or actually all the players that potentially hit a home run on that given day based on matchup. And speaking of matchups, that's the other tool we added today, and it's my favorite tool to use in this thing that I've been working on with a friend of mine. Is it gives you all the best matchups for hitters on the day, whether they face a left-handed pitcher, or right-handed pitcher, the ballpark, how they're doing against left-handed, right-handed pitchers based on splits. It has everything factored into one number, and it sorts and tells you who it thinks could possibly be the best matchups on the day. Be sure to take a look at that along with the rest of the tools on RotoCurve, and let's make some money tonight. Good luck, everybody.